Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I thank you as always for spending your time today with me here as we delve into another painting video. Today we are entering the Age of Stars as we take a look into painting one of the most iconic characters from Elden Ring, Ranni the Witch.
And engage in jolly cooperation.
A pleasure to meet thee, Tarnished.
I've ditched the airbrush for today and we're going to primarily stick with wet blending for this one. As you can see, it's a wonderful looking model and I printed the body and the hat separately so you can take it off and you can put it on. It's primed with grey sear as this model is going to be tint and tone heavy, so we'll be utilising a bunch of contrast paints for this, so the lighter the primer, the better the contrast will show up. So let's get these paints lined up. And now to whip out the wet palette. So to start, we are going to be painting her hat, and the techniques I use in this part will be used across the model, so hopefully it should make enough sense as we go along. To start with, we are going to put our hat colours all on the wet palette so we can mix and blend between them. Starting with CORAX white, and also a blob of Celestra grey, and also some Administratum grey. This should give us a nice selection of shades for the main coat. To add some shadows into this, I'm dolloping on some Ischen grey to the palette. And what you can see me do here is, with it nicely thinned down, I'm applying the darker shades to these little creases and recesses where the shadows would sit in the material. So as you build more layers of darker shades to the underneath parts, you want to make sure you're using lighter shades to blend up to, so you're creating that nice smooth transition effect from light to dark. There's an overall blue hue around Ranni, so for the shadows in the hat I'm also going to mix in a small amount of LOTHERN blue just to help accentuate those shadows a bit more. And just sticking to this wet blending technique and just adding in thin layers every time, slowly building it up, making sure the higher the raised parts are, the lighter they are, and vice versa, the lower parts and the deeper creases are darker to bring out the shadows. To help add some stronger dark shades, I'm also using the Mechanica Standard Grey base paint to add a bit more of a dense paint to the shadows. You can actually see this faint blue tint to the shadows that's appearing on the hat. That's made by just adding small amounts of LOTHERN blue to the shades and very lightly going over them with a very thin layer. Not quite a glaze, but just enough to bring out the blue. With the hat pretty much done, I'm just adding some Wraithbone to these little wriggly bits on the hat. With the hat sorted, it's time to start the main model. So we'll start off by beginning on the coat, and for that we'll load up some Abaddon Black to the palette, followed by some more Mechanica Standard Grey and some more CORAX White. The overall colour will be the grey, but what I'm also looking to do is blending in some whiter greys to the front of the coat and blending in some blacks and darker tones to the base, to the creases and to the lower parts of the coat. This should give some realistic shadowing and highlighting, hopefully. Then, with a fine layer brush, I'm going to go over the edges of this fur with some white to add some extra detailing. For the big strand at the front, I'm doing a coat of Catacan flesh on them. Then for the little wraps on the strands, I'm applying some ZANDRI dust and then wet blending in some Catacan flesh over the top in the little creases, again just to bring out some more of those shadows. Now I've had this paint set around for ages and never actually used it. It's Nighthaunt Gloom, and I think it's a beta contrast before Games Workshop actually developed any contrast paints. but it's a really nice thin oily colour and it seems pretty close to Ranni's hair colour, so I'm applying a thin layer of it all over the hair, acting as the base coat. Then for some darker hair tones, I'm mixing a 50-50 mix of Leviathan Blue Contrast with some Contrast Medium, just to act as a wash, and we're gently going over different areas of the hair to add some interest and variation. In the same vein as the darker contrast, I'm also applying a mix of Talisar Blue and Contrast Medium, just to bring out some more vivid blues to other areas of the hair. And because contrast paints are a different density and are typically thinner to acrylics, they settle really well into all these little dips and recesses in her hair, and the contrast medium mixed in with it means the colour doesn't fully overpower the layers we've already established. Hair done, skin next. Now, her skin seems to be a greyish blue tone, and for that I'm mixing in some Celestra Grey onto the palette with some Thousand Suns Blue. Now, using the same wet blending technique as we used on the hat, I'm applying a very thin first layer of this grey-blue mix onto her face, her arms and her legs. The goal is to get an even thin coat across it all that we can build more colour, highlights and shadows to really try and make this face seem as realistic as my skill set will allow. What I've learnt from watching many tutorials and looking into shading and light theory and how it reacts with faces is that you really need to be applying the darker tones to the sunken parts of the cheekbones and to the parts around the eyes and below the eyebrows, just to build the frame of the face. To that you can add lighter tones to parts like the chin, the nose, the brow line and to the eyelids, and the trick is to keep the layers thin so you can slowly build them up one by one, just so you don't fully erase any of the previous layers that you've put on. Keeping the paint thin, keeping the paint wet means that you'll have an easier time blending between these tones. Now I'm just painting the strings on her arms with some ZANDRI dust, and I'm also applying this to her shoes as well. Now also for the shoes, I decided to slap on a thin layer of Skeleton Horde, just because it's another good contrast that will help sink into the little nooks and crannies all over the shoes. Just adds a little bit more interest. With that done, it's onto the dress, and I'm mixing in the same grey tones as before, and again we'll be applying the same wet blending technique as we saw on the hat. On this dress, there's some really obvious and apparent folds that we can really accentuate, and it should be easy enough to do. Starting with the main base coat and then adding in the darker tones to the deepest parts of the folds, blending outwards to the lighter parts. Then it's just a matter of painting the stone, and I'm using a darker blend of black and Mechanica Standard Grey to begin with, then dry brushing on some Dawnstone. Just keeping the brush strokes nice and light and just quickly brushing mainly across the raised parts to add that highlight. Then to enhance what we've just done, do the exact same with some Longbeard Grey to really bring out those lighter tones. For the plants that are here on the rock, I'm adding a dry brush base layer of Caliban Green. Then on top of that, adding in some more muted green with Lauren Forest. And with these greens applied, I'm adding in some variation by dry brushing on a small amount of Avalon Sunset, which should help break up the greens a bit and add a little bit of variation. Now, I don't know why I fancied this, but I dry brushed on some Balthazar Gold to different parts of the rock. You see, it's a very glimmery, bronzy colour, and I think it works quite nicely to add some interest to the stone. It kind of makes it look a bit irony, a little bit coppery in parts, which sort of kind of makes it look a bit more natural, I think. Now with that done, I've just noticed we need to add some little extra bits to the dress. So with a fine layer brush, I'm just detailing over some white over all the little decals. Then, just to finish off, I'm painting the inside of the hat with some more Nighthaunt gloom. And then just giving a quick black wash over all the lower parts of the model to bring in some more contrast. And that's it done. I'm just going to clean up after this session and let her hat dry for a sec. Now let's pop her hat back on. Oh, bit low there, pal. Oh, okay, I'm just leaving it there. Job done, I guess. Ah, that's better. Good job. So there you have it, Ranni the Witch in all her glory. Well, as always, I want to thank you for spending your time with me here today as we painted yet another Elden Ring model. I greatly appreciate you stopping by, and I look forward to having you again as we journey further into the world of Dark Souls models. Until next time, don't you dare go hollow.